She's a motivator, millionaire mentor, Jesus lover, serial entrepreneur, mother, and former Wall Street attorney who comes with her own personal trigger warning. On a mission to teach you how to empower yourself and heal your life from the inside out. And now, welcome to Deep Throat, and by that I mean throat chakra, with Liana Shanti.
Aloha, everyone. Welcome to Deep Throat, and by that I mean throat chakra. This is your host, Liana. Today I have an amazing group of guest speakers, and I can't wait to introduce every single one of them to you because they have such powerful stories to share. And we're covering a topic that I feel is barely ever discussed in the world of healing. And that's the issue of healing as it relates to people in marginalized communities. So I want to sort of start out giving my reasoning for this podcast and why this is a topic that I feel is so incredibly important. And that's because from my perspective as a teacher of a healing path, of connecting people to their divine self and connecting to Jesus, healing is for everybody. Healing is for every body. Healing is for every soul. Jesus is for every soul. And you know, that's what I see when I talk to people, when I work with people, when I see people, even out in the world, I see energy and I see souls. But it also really bothers me personally when I see a lot of people in the dominant culture saying things like, I don't see color, because I think that's sort of a disassociation from the reality of being a human and being in the 3D. And they make a lot of wide sweeping generalizations that I feel are harmful to the access to healing that I think is so important. And for me, I see a glaring problem with that. And I think that generally speaking, I think we can all agree that there are widespread problems to healing. I mean, if you look at humanity, the vast majority of people are not sitting around asking the question, how can I embody unconditional love? What is my soul's journey? How can I connect fully with Jesus? And there's so few people actually doing that. But then when you look within that group of people that are doing it, there are even fewer people that are coming from marginalized communities. The numbers are significantly lower. And I believe there are a lot of reasons for that. And today I'm going to let you hear from people who are from these communities, share with you why they believe there are barriers to healing from within their specific community, and to allow them the space to tell it in their words, in their lived experience, which I think is vital to this process. And, you know, this barrier to access has always been something that deeply and profoundly troubled me because, as I said, there are people seeking light. You're a small group of people to begin with. And so the barriers being additional for people that are from marginalized communities, it's almost like, how are they ever going to reach healing? How are they ever going to get out from where they're at on their soul journey? And there's just very little in the way of discussion on this topic. If you look at the New Age, nobody's really talking about it in the New Age, definitely not in the community of health and wellness, very little conversation around this topic. And religious program, like, reconfirms this. It just basically says that marginalized communities remain where they are because they're going to be saved at the end. And I really find that so troublesome because it's keeping people oppressed. It's keeping people stuck. It's saying, okay, well, as long as you believe this religious dogma, no matter what's happening in your life, no matter how society is treating you, no matter what barriers to healing you have, it's all going to be okay because you're going to be miraculously saved at the end. And that's a radical form of disempowerment. It is a radical delivery of doctrine that says you're not capable. You're not able to heal yourself. You're not able to find your own divine connection. You have to stay oppressed because don't complain. You know, you have God, you have Jesus, whatever religion you're a part of, and you will find salvation when you die. And that gives people zero access to actual healing. And that's actually what prompted me to have this podcast today, because in my community, there actually is quite a high number, relatively speaking, percentage-wise, of people from marginalized communities. And I've done a lot of contemplating and thinking about why that is. And I know, obviously, first and foremost, it's because I'm speaking to souls. And for, years and years, when I first started doing this work, I was not even visible in any way. And I had many people say that they thought I was an older Indian woman because my name that was given to me by my teacher in India was Shanti, which is an Indian word that means peace. And so, I think it was just that lack of visibility that allowed anybody to come to the community. And also because my message speaks to souls. And I've always considered my work to be the work of a teacher's teacher or a teacher of leaders, a teacher of way showers. And the students that come to me and the people that find my work are often the people who are really the leaders, who are the breakout people in their communities. And I've heard this time and time again from so many people, even including people who were former drug addicts or alcoholics who say, you didn't specifically appeal to drug addicts. You weren't speaking specifically to that community, but I resonated with every word you said, and here I am. And those people are going out into the world and speaking specifically to those communities for the millions of people that aren't hearing about this work, that aren't finding a path, and that are in that community of, for example, drug addicts or former drug addicts or people who are trying to leave addictions, who are looking for a path, and they wouldn't necessarily be jumping right into the level of work that I do and the path that I offer. And I've seen that trend, and I've seen it continue and grow, that the people that do come directly to me tend to be, for the most part, leaders, way showers, and teachers themselves. And they become the doorway that seems accessible for people in their communities to get to this work, to find true healing and to find freedom for themselves and for their soul. So I feel like this is such a vital conversation. It's one that I know we're probably going to have many times with many more guests and expand on this and grow this aspect of healing, because my ultimate goal is for every soul that wants healing on planet Earth, that they have a way to find this healing. That's it. That's the goal. So with that being said, I would like to introduce an amazing woman. Her name is Zaria Spell, and she is a writer, she's a music lover, and she is a creator of a blog that is coming soon called Freed Asada. And I would like to open the mic for her so she can share her background with you and share with you what part of the marginalized community she identifies with. And then we're going to go from there, where I have some great questions for her. So welcome, Zaria.
Hi, Liana. It feels amazing to be on. Thank you so much for inviting me.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for being willing to be here and share your very unique and important perspective. So if you can just share with our listeners what community you are a part of and sort of what you're representing here today for everyone's education and learning.
I am from the African American community, but even more specifically, African American women, because it is a bit of a slight, difference in how oppression or marginalization affects African American women and men, but that's the segment or the sector that I represent.
Okay. Thank you for making that distinction. Actually, I'm going to start with that since you brought that up. I actually think that's very important, because one thing that I feel dominant culture has a hard time with, for whatever reasons, is understanding that within marginalized communities, there can also be further marginalization in your own community. And when I hear people that are in the dominant culture just make a generalization like the Black community, for example, I've had personal friends of mine say they don't identify as African American, they identify as Black. And I've spoken to people who have, very close relatives in Africa, and they identify as African American and not just Black American. And people who, such as yourself, say, well, being a female within the Black community is its whole own other segment within our community. And I think that just at the outset of this podcast, it's so important for everybody listening to understand that there are so many layers to a person's experience, a lived experience on this planet, that you cannot make generalizations and assumptions that on the basis of how a person appears to be to you visually, that just automatically categorizes them in one area. So I think you are such a perfect person to start off this podcast. And if you can go a little bit into what that means to you to be a female in your community, how it differs, and specifically why the voice of the female in your community is important with respect to healing. If you want to just expound on that, and I'll give you the microphone to just do that so we can all learn from you.
For sure. Um, a lot of the Black American woman experience is very much tied to, being the matriarch, or how do I say this, like the mother of everyone, and the idea of being, you know just as involved as the men when it comes to fighting racism, so to speak. And a lot of the socialization, that happens in the community as far as being a woman is, you know, you stay behind, you ride or die, you support the men in the community no matter what. And even just from a very young age, I could just always remember a time where it was very much expected of the women, to always be that backbone. A lot of people in the Black community and even outside the community, consider like the women the backbone of the community. The the major issue that has kind of been very prevalent, I would say, since the 1800s, is this um, invisibility of the specific oppression that the women face within the community, that many times can be, adversarial to the fight to end racism. Because when a lot of people think of, racism and how it affects the Black community, a lot of the focus tends to be on the men.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, it's very common. It's very much a real thing. When you're a woman inside the community, or even a person a part of the Black queer community, a lesbian, gay, or bisexual person, a lot of the times what you'll find is that your issues or the things that might affect you take a backseat towards the most important thing, which is, fighting to make sure, the men, stop being oppressed, and that the men take their, what, our community feels is the rightful, place as, being the head of their families, being masculine and whatnot.
Right.
And when in our community, we tend to compare ourselves a lot to other communities, especially white communities. And because that whole role of, the patriarch, the head of the home, the strong man that's like leading his community, is not very much valued. Well, it's not so much very common in the community like it is in other communities.
Mm-hmm.
Because of that, it's valued that much more.
Okay.
And so all the conversations and a lot of the schools of thought within the community tend to be filtered through this perspective of, man needs to the man need to, be the head of the family. They need to go back into being, the masculine protectors and providers and whatnot, because, that's working for these people over there, but we need to put that back in our community. And, this is a lot of the rhetoric that is very common, and that's very heard throughout many of the, Black consciousness spaces, the circle, those types of circles,
Okay.
and, the Black church and whatnot, and just pretty much any uh, anywhere in the Black community, that is like considered the number one thing. Now,
Oh,
where the issue lies for a lot of African American women is that, so much of the oppression that we experience actually comes from within our community. And not a lot of African American women are very honest about that, not very vocal about that, because there's this uncomfortable place of feeling like you are supporting, you know, racism against Black men if you speak up about, the domestic violence, the rampant sexual abuse, the narcissism that is so rampant, and, glorified even in our communities.
uh,
And
wow. That's
yeah, it's a lot. And
it is a lot.
so
Yeah.
what I remember we had, this conversation a few months ago back on Instagram where you asked me more about this.
Yes.
And around that time period, I came up with this term just came to my head called cultural codependency.
Okay.
And it's the term I use to describe the relationship that African American women have with their entire community, whereas there is a constant gaslighting and a
Wow.
constant, you know, uh, encouragement of us to accept a lot of shame and guilt for the state
Wow.
of the community, because there is this underlying fear that, if the women start, bettering themselves, not just educationally, because
Uh-huh.
that's pretty common for us, but bettering themselves as in not accepting and moving away from the things that cause so much dysfunction and toxicity towards us and our families. There's this underlying fear that the women would, that would mean the dismantling of the community. And I can
Wow.
tell you from so much of my observations from, friendships on Facebook and YouTube and Instagram, because I learn a lot through my relationships with other people. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
I'm a very relational person. And over the past 10 years, there has actually been a steadily growing number of women within the community who, it's called the divestment movement, but
Okay.
they literally have decided that, our community is not supporting, um, our needs and our wants as women. It's very one-sided, and we do not, you know, feel heard within our communities. And so we're going to, take our resources, our bodies and whatnot, and, not support a lot of the various movements and other things within the community. In the past, few years, there has been a lot of racial tension in the country. And, so
Yes.
many of those, movements were, a lot of women in them. But what
Mhm.
people haven't seen is like on the complete other side, there was this, continuously growing number of women who are saying, we are done with that. Like, we cannot continue to um, give, our time and our energy to movements and mindsets that just do not consider us and support us.
Right.
And so that has become, a growing thing. And the that the women, in that community are still relatively small compared to, much of the mainstream African American female community, but it's been a split, like a
Okay.
direct split of
Okay.
women going this way and, women, staying.
Do you feel, I have a question for you. Do you feel that the sense of this invisibility that you mentioned and the lack of having a voice, even within your own community, and really being oppressed from within, I have full body chills because I feel like these are topics that, I mean, as a white person, I rarely, and I look for information. I'm a searcher of knowledge and information and learning about humanity. And I don't really even see this talked about in any context, let alone in the context of healing or spiritual path. But do you feel from your lived experience that there's a sense of betrayal that women within your community feel like if they go the route of this divestment movement, as you termed it, that they're betraying their people, their community, their camaraderie? Is there something of a betrayal here that you feel women might be afraid of to join the louder voices of women who are saying, look, we're not taking this anymore. We're not doing this. We're not supporting this. Do you feel like that's the split that they feel like it's such a betrayal because your community has already been so betrayed by the predominant culture that they're like, gosh, if we split, we're going to be even less impactful. Do you feel that there's any truth to that?
Absolutely. In fact, so many of the female bloggers and writers and speakers that I was reading about and listening to in my teenage years when this started becoming more prominent in Black spaces on social media, uh, many of those women had to hide their faces. Like, many of them literally did not feel safe showing
Wow.
their faces on their social media, because talking about, this issue, it's already in a community where, protection of the women is just not valued at all.
Hmm.
When you start talking about the women doing what they have to do to be in better spaces, that support, their, divine feminine or their safety, that's very frightening, because so much of our community is held, or what's left of it is held together by, the financial and the emotional support of the women. Um, so much of what keeps our community going is the the women's support of it.
Right.
And a lot of women feel like, uh, I used to see so many just intense conversations, not even conversations, but flat out attacks from other women to women who would recognize this, because it's like you're uh, poking a hole in an illusion. It's
Right.
like you're taking away from a major part of who they are. Just to talk about my own individual experience in going through this healing process of healing mother wound and father wound and narcissism. It's been so very, very scary many times because so much of what's supposed to be your identity as a Black woman is tied to saving the community, quote unquote, saving, and never leaving your men's side and just always being there. And it's like, having to be in this space where you're out of that identity, where you're like, it's, you're breaking free of that. And then, you're still in this world that is very much prevalent with racism. It's just very scary and uncomfortable. And the reality is so many Black women just do not want to feel lonely. It's a very real thing. It's a major reason why we, stay attached to so much dysfunction and toxicity because, we feel we have to.
That's so profound.
But yes, yeah.
It's sorry. I wanted to just emphasize that how profound what you're saying really is, because healing in general, from my perspective as a teacher of this path, it's obviously hard for everybody. And, everybody is a part of a toxic family cult, and they are breaking free from that and ending relationships and refusing to be married to narcissists and disconnecting from parents who are toxic gaslighters. And that's just a blanket statement. But then it's like this additional layer of oppression, as you're sharing with us, from within, and all these extra considerations and stresses and fears. And when you look at something like mother wound, which we know, in which I teach in mother wound, that it's taboo for anybody, regardless of what, environment you come from, taboo in society in general to come and say anything negative about, quote, a mother, even though the majority of our wounding comes from our mothers, right? But it's like this very weird trap of you can't say anything about a mother. And I remember when you and I were first chatting on Instagram, which was the absolute seedling for this very podcast that we're on today. And I shared with you that a very close friend of mine who was a Black male had shared with me that his mom was very abusive. And of course, he's coming from the male perspective, so different from yours, but that his mom was very abusive physically, extremely physically abusive. And yet he couldn't bring himself to have any acknowledgement that he was traumatized as a child. And he said, all I had was a mother. I didn't have a father. I never knew my father. Male role models are not a thing in my particular community where I'm from. And my mother was and is everything. And I can't acknowledge that I was traumatized, because that would the whole house of cards would fall apart. And I thought, it just made me cry. I'm like, how devastating that he's feeling the weight of the responsibility of holding up, as he called it, the house of cards, which you called it an illusion a few minutes ago, that's keeping up this illusion. It's like, how is anybody going to break through that to heal? And, obviously my answer is you, everybody on this podcast, which is why I'm doing this, because I know that you have so much to share and to teach and to be such a powerful voice in reaching people who are in pain, reaching women who might be fighting for their, community and not wanting to break off and support the women who you said had to hide their faces and couldn't even show who they were. Those women too are in pain. They're all in pain. Every single woman in that you're describing, no matter what side they're choosing, they're in pain and they're reacting out of fear. And it's only by conversations like this and awareness and education that people can say, all right, it is scary, but there's a path, there's a way. And people such as yourself, I feel, are vital and essential to that happening. Right. So getting back to the question, I wanted to ask you, in terms of healing, specifically the core wounds, healing mother wound and healing father wound, how do you feel that someone such as yourself who has been on the healing path can reach people who might not even be asking the questions if they have a right to heal, if they deserve to have healing for themselves, if they're worthy of healing? Do you have any insight into ways that people can be reached within your community?
Yes, absolutely. I feel that, the blog that, I'll be coming up with very soon, Freed Asada, is, very, is going to be very essential in that process, because so much of, what I experienced as a teenager, going through those various phases of, trying to find out who I was, and trying to do that mainly through a cultural lens, which is what so many, Black people do, uh, ended up, bringing me to this path ultimately, because I was just in this space of realizing that literally everything that I was uh, seeing and observing in the community just had a specific pattern. And, it was all just, there was always just something missing. And, you know, being in that space where there's just so much duality in the community, and there is this, uh, even more, sense of hierarchy, you know, which, includes, the sexism and the homophobia and the colorism. It's like you're just pushed further down in that invisibility. And so I seriously feel like my writing would be essential in helping many, souls that are willing in the Black community find their way to this path. And then,
Absolutely.
of
No, I
course,
agree.
yeah. And then, of course, my story in general, because I haven't spoken extensively about it right now, but I do feel like it would help so many people in the community be able to, crack through that illusion, because they would be seeing the connections between, the mother wound and the father wound that is, prevalent in the community, and the narcissism, to the outward oppression that, we experience and that we see. And it's so very important for me to know that uh, people in my community know that there is hope, and that, they can find that freedom for themselves. So that's my idea.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I love that. And I think that, as I've said a few times, your voice is incredibly important for so many reasons. And I love when you responded to the questions I had asked you prior to the podcast. And you said race first mentality blocks the divine feminine power. I feel like in a sentence, that's just everything in a nutshell. It's, what are people looking at first before they're looking at themselves, their own power, their divine feminine power, specifically of the women. And you coined this term, cultural codependency, which is hard to break out of, you said in this response that you gave to me. And I feel like if people hear you speak about this and hear it on this podcast and start to listen and say, wait a minute, am I, part of that? Am I swept up in this cultural codependency? Am I blocking my own growth, my own healing, my own expansion because of all these other barriers, and because of being part of this marginalized community, can I break free from this? And of course the answer is yes, because you're doing it, right? So, one of the
Yeah.
things that I say to everybody, and certainly to you, is that being a person who represents a group of people, and for your group of people to see you, that you're visible, that you are somebody they can identify with, sort of in the beginning intro where I used the example of someone who's a drug addict who might not necessarily identify with me. If they see me as a teacher, they're like, well, she's not a drug addict. She doesn't have a history of addiction. I can't relate to that. So the people who are coming to me who were drug addicts and who heal themselves from that, they go out into the community and people can say, oh, you were once me. You walked in my shoes. I can relate to this. And I think that's so essential. And
Yes.
to have people look at someone and say, okay, I can relate to her or to him or to whoever, because I know that they have walked in my shoes. And, the people who find their way to my teachings, they're taking the express train. They're like, don't really care
Yeah.
that your experiences are not mine. I am resonating with these teachings on Jesus and I am freeing myself. And then I will go out into the world and I will share this with everybody. And I just think that that's so powerful and so beautiful. And so I just want to ask you if there's anything else you wanted to add before I move on to our next guest, who is Roxanne, and but give you an opportunity to say anything else if there's anything else you wanted to add.
Yes, for sure. The last thing that I will say is that, for the longest, time, just feeling invisible within my community, and then of course outside the community, and just like in my own family with all the various oppression that and wounding that is just leaked onto you. Uh, Despite all that, I feel like all of it has uh, been such a major catalyst in leading me that much closer to who I actually am, and the becoming and re-remembering of that, because um, it's very common to think that when you're a victim of racism, sexism, or homophobia, or anything else, that you're unworthy, and that you're not, you don't get that quote unquote seat at the table, you're not equal.
Mm-hmm.
But in actuality, I feel it leads you in a way that much closer to who, you being a soul connected to God, connected to Goddess, because of the adversary, the oppression, like just all of it compiled together, forces you to look elsewhere. And that is essentially why I found you, I feel.
That's really beautiful. It makes me think of one of the other things that you said to me, which was that your feeling of hopelessness is what led you to healing. So I think that's along the lines of what you're saying, that utterly
Yes.
disconnected, hopeless feeling. You're like, okay, I need something. What is my true self? And you found your soul's path.
Right. Exactly.
So, well, that's absolutely beautiful, Zaria. Thank you so much for sharing all of this with us. We are going to continue on to our next guest. So thank you. Next, we have Dr. Roxanne Smith. Dr. Smith is a physician, CEO of Lemurian Healthcare PC. And so I would like to welcome her to the floor. And go ahead, Roxanne. And if you don't mind sharing with us your community that you're a part of and that you are speaking about on today's podcast, that would be great.
Thank you. Liana, thank you so much for this opportunity. Good evening, everyone. I am Roxanne Smith. The community I represent would be the Caribbean community, an immigrant community that has come here after growing up in a totally different culture.
Okay, perfect. So you grew up in Jamaica,
Yes.
and and you had shared with me prior to the podcast that you were born and raised in Jamaica, and when you lived in Jamaica, obviously you didn't identify at all as marginalized. But moving to the US at age 19, you found yourself in the midst of a different experience on the basis of your physical appearance, but also your accent. So you also shared with me that you were told you were not Black, you were Jamaican, and that you would be treated differently than other Black Americans. So if you want to just sort of give us some insight into that, I found that very fascinating and interesting of what that experience might have been like for you. So if you're able to share that with us, that would be wonderful.
Yes, I'd love to. Well, growing up at home in Jamaica, it was our motto is out of many, one people. And so I had friends of different colors, races, creeds. I dated across the spectrum. If there was any stratification, it was usually along the lines of money,
Okay.
then the color, and so on and so forth. We had discrimination in between the races. We had bad names for people of different ethnicities, but in general, we just cross married, had children with different people. And so we have a blend of the races there that it can be very beautiful to see.
Okay.
So then I moved to America and I am pretty secure in being the majority of the country that I come from. The majority of the country is Black in origin. And so I come and I moved to Mississippi and the culture shock began.
Wow. What a shock. I mean, Mississippi of all places, right?
Yes, I grew up watching all the shows about America, all the college shows with people going on spring break and everything that was going on. And since, I knew white Jamaicans, I knew Jamaicans of every color, I just thought that was going to be my experience. The experience I had was a little different. I came to a predominantly Black HBCU. I deliberately chose that because I wanted to still be in a predominantly Black situation when I came to America. It was something I deliberately chose.
Okay.
I'm in Mississippi. It's 1987. And I see that there is a Black pool and a white pool in the town that is closest to my university.
Wait, in 1987?
Yes, ma'am. And I was like, what is going on here?
What?
And the way it was managed is the school that was closest to that pool, you could not get in there if you were Black. It just was not happening. And so that's how they kept the segregation going, but it was just understood to be that way.
Okay, so it was just shy of a sign that says white people, Black people. It was
not right. No
you were
sign.
born from the country, right? You couldn't go to the school, therefore you weren't using that pool. So it was understood that it was for white people only.
Just about.
Oh gosh.
So then, it was pretty weird, but I wasn't going to that town much. Okay. I then needed to go shopping. And so I went with some new friends. They had a car. I didn't. They took me into another town, not that same town. And I was shopping and I'm walking around browsing, looking for stuff because, Mississippi isn't cold, but it's cold to this Jamaican child. So I'm like, I need sweaters. I need
Right. I hear you on that.
right. So I am being followed, literally stalked around the store where it's not being hidden. They're just like watching everything I touch and they're moving their heads. And I am getting irritated. So I turn around in a very thick accent because I couldn't control it back then. I'm speaking to them in English, but it's very heavily accented. And the person asks me, "Where are you from?" I tell them, and their behavior just changes. They invite me back for tea. I am sitting in the back with them, telling them stories of Jamaica. And I am sipping on hot tea, which, I am English, the colonizers that we had were English, and I love tea.
You're a tea drinker.
I'm a tea drinker. And so then I said, "Oh, my friend is probably looking for me. I should go and get her and tell her where we are. Can she come back here too?" So she goes, "Oh, is your friend from Jamaica too?" So I said, "Oh, no, she's from," and I named a town that was predominantly Black in Mississippi. And the lady goes, "No, she can't come back here. This is my private space." I said, "But I'm back here." She goes, "But you're Jamaican." I said, "But okay, but
wow,
we're both Black." She goes, "No, you're not Black. You're Jamaican." And I said, "Okay."
You're not Black? I'm just dumbfounded, but I just never even heard of anything like this.
It happened to me. I was 19, and then I went back to town, to the college, and I'm talking to the Black American friends that I had been making about the situation. And they reiterated the same statement. "I am not Black. I am Jamaican, and I do not know what it is to be Black." And I'm looking at them like, I don't understand. I don't get it.
So let me ask you a question. So these were your Black friends that said that?
Also, yep. When I was telling the story and I said what the lady said, they said, "But yeah, you're not Black. You're Jamaican." And I said, "Oh, okay. There's something different here."
That is mind-blowing to me. I mean, if you hadn't spoken and they didn't hear your accent and they're just looking at you, they're treating you one way, and then you start to speak and all of a sudden you're not Black anymore. That's just so bizarre.
It was quite bizarre. And because of that, I actually I tried to hide my accent while I was in Mississippi for the subsequent years, because I just didn't want to be treated differently. And I could tell that the people resented it, because I literally was used to being the dominant number, the dominant race from where I came from. So I walked and talked and acted as if I was in charge of stuff.
Right. Makes perfect sense knowing you.
And then people would challenge it. I would open my mouth and then they would just acquiesce to me, because they're like, "Oh, it's like I was an exotic creature."
Oh my gosh.
I did not like that. And so I changed. And so then my cousins started messing with me because they said I had like a Jamaican American accent, because I definitely tried to change my accent because of that incident in Mississippi.
Right.
And
right.
subsequent ones. Yes.
And you also shared with me in one of your responses to my questions that one time you were in Pennsylvania and you were in, I guess, an expensive sports car and somebody yelled out a racial slur. Can you share that experience with us?
Yeah, that was a couple, maybe a decade or so later.
Okay.
I lived in Mississippi, and this is literally the first time someone had called me. And it still hurts, actually, because it was the first time in my entire life I'd ever been called a nigger. I was driving Yeah. Based on what they were saying when they said it, yes. Because, I know the definition of what that can mean in the dictionary and all this other stuff, but I knew that that's not what they were saying. I was
Mhm.
driving, and because of the car I was in, I had certain capabilities and speed. And yes, I did do a little bit of risky driving. And I was able to pass through, but I'm sure it caused their heart to stop for a second or so. I'm
Right.
not without blame in the situation. I put my hand out to say sorry because I know that I was a little aggressive in my driving,
Right.
and the guy drives up because it was a roundabout. I was in Pennsylvania, call it New Jersey. New Jersey has these roundabouts just outside on the other
Yes.
side.
Yes.
So I am in New Jersey, and the guy calls me a nigger and then
Oh my
speeds
God.
off. And the visceral feeling, I was just like, and in that same car, I was chased 2 to 3 counties in New Jersey. The state trooper, he saw me go by, and I was going at a normal speed. And he decided to follow me because he said, and I quote, "There is no way that I own the car and or I would not speed." And so when I
Oh
started to
my
go
gosh.
faster, he pulled me over and gave me a ticket after he realized I did own the car. And then he had to keep crossing out the township because he had tracked me so far. He was out of his
His
comfort
jurisdiction,
zone.
right?
No. He's a
Oh.
state trooper. So
Oh,
he's
okay.
in
State. Right.
jurisdiction, but he did not know what township he was in because he had gone so far from where he had started to follow me. And it took him a while to catch me because the car was fast.
I
And
mean, that part of the story is kind of funny, but the rest of it, not so much. But I get a visceral reaction hearing you talk about these racial slurs in the roundabout and this police officer telling you you couldn't possibly own this car. I just, I mean, there's no words. There's no words. And I'm so glad that you're sharing this because I think that this is not that long ago. And I feel like making this relevant today is so important because there's a lot of delusion out there. I see it where people just assume things like this don't happen. Now, even for me, and I make myself aware of as many things as possible by talking to as many people as possible and being a really good listener, hearing what people have to say about their experiences. I never heard anyone say that there was a distinction between being Jamaican or being black. So that's something brand new that I just learned, 10 minutes ago. That even within what I would have considered, quote, your own community, people being black, and they themselves are discriminating against you and telling you that you don't know what it's like to be black in America. And then on top of it, you trying to change your accent to avoid special treatment or to avoid being looked at like some rare exotic bird or some weird, categorization that people were trying to put you in. And then yet having these experiences where people are yelling racial slurs at you in a car and a police officer is chasing you multiple counties because you can't possibly own that car. So it's like, to me, that seems like you're getting the treatment of what many Black Americans experience. And on top of it, then within your own community saying you don't know what it's like to be us because you're Jamaican. So it's like layers and layers and layers of what you have had to deal with.
I agree, but I came to understand what my fellow Black people were saying
Mm-hmm.
over time because I could blatantly see the difference. As I was sitting here listening to Zaria, you know, I grew up with a bunch of women, Black women, but they didn't think and act like the Black women that she's describing. And we had, there were fathers in the homes, or, fathers were there, but then we had similar issues where the men would go and do whatever they wanted, and or, you know, the narcissism, the abuses that would happen, but it just manifested in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
I come from one of the few countries in the world that has had a female as the head of the government.
Right.
And when she was head of the government, yes, she had a lot of flack that she had to deal with. But as a Jamaican girl and woman, I had certain equalities with a man sitting across the table from me that I had to temper when I came to the United States.
Okay.
If I was in a classroom in Jamaica, and I've been there, and being a male person were disagreeing, and he said something idiotic, and I could say, "Oh my God, that is so idiotic. What are you talking about?" And then everybody may or may not laugh. He would say whatever, and he would be upset, but he wouldn't be like losing his mind.
Right.
I was in a meeting where I caught an executive in a lie. And I said, that is a bold faced untruth, because I didn't call him a liar. I said, it's an untruth. And you know that this and this and this. And my boss in the meeting reprimanded me and told me I could not speak to the man like that, even though he was literally lying to all of us. And I had the receipts in my hand.
Wow.
It was just, and I just realized that there are differences, and I had to temper myself. I've lived in this country now for over 30 years. And I had to temper myself and remember that I am not in the same place, that I grew up with certain privileges and certain advantages that they just was not here for a lot of people.
Thank you so much for that, Roxanne. The next question that I have for you is specifically related to healing. And when I asked the question prior to the podcast, do you feel that healing that is not directed specifically at your community is difficult to access? And what encouraged you to heal? You shared some really important information with me about your connection to Jesus. And also you refer to yourself as a code breaker, which I love. So if you would share that with everybody, that would be wonderful.
Okay, so I remember being one of those children that would challenge things. And then I also saw things. And from a very young age, I knew I was here to do something. I did not know what. And there were times when I questioned, why was I born when there is no war?
Wow.
I've just had these feelings, and I was like, maybe God knew that I wasn't going to make a good slave. I would, people who've known me years ago, former best friends and people I used to just shoot the breeze with, I would say little funny things like that I would have made a bad slave. I'd have been dead in no time, and so on and so forth.
Right.
But I always thought that I was born, what happened? Why is there not? I know there was supposed to be a war. I found it. I'm now at peace. But as a child going to church, I picked at the hypocrisies I saw in the church from a very young age. My mother had to deal with that. She was not very happy with all of that. I used to talk about how they were hypocritical and, why are they looking at what people wear and all this other stuff. There's a lot of shame and guilt and, just stuff. And so I left the church at 16 when I was allowed to by my mother, because we were being brought to church every Sunday. Even if, the car wasn't working, we were going to figure something out. We were going to church. And then I joined another type of church. I put in there a Pocomania church. It's one where you do more jumping up and down and, catching spirits and speaking in tongues. I'm not quite
Oh,
sure what
wow.
it was. But I remember, feeling like, at that time that I had a calling to do something with healing. Now, not healing others, I did not know what it was. And I
Mhm.
kind of transmuted that into going to medical school. I already knew I was going because it was a wish that my father had. And, that was what was happening. I
Mhm.
also liked medicine and I liked law, and I thought I was going to do both, but that didn't happen. I did medicine. And I thought that was what I was supposed to do.
Okay.
But that was that. But as a code breaker, I knew all the time that I was a little different. I just didn't always know what I was supposed to do.
I find that fascinating because so far, I mean, all of the people that I've gotten to know in my community and hearing Zaria, hearing you, it's just reconfirming for me when I'm always asking, why are certain people responsive to the level of teaching that I offer and other people are scared of it? And this common denominator with everyone so far is this sense of, you were different, you were strong, you were stubborn, you weren't just accepting the stories, the lies. You were the one speaking out, or the one getting in trouble, or the one that was, looked upon with frowns by family members. And I hear that from the vast majority of people in my community. And I think that's what, I mean, certainly you guys all know that's me. That's my personality. I was constantly in trouble. I was constantly speaking up for other people and using my voice when I could, when other people couldn't, when other people were disempowered and afraid to speak up, or they couldn't speak up, or they would have gotten in trouble at home if they spoke up. I was the one opening my mouth and speaking up and speaking out and being loud and getting in trouble, paying the price, getting in trouble. But for me, luckily, I had my parents to back me up. And they would say, we're proud of her for doing this. Like, this is who we're raising her to be, because she has a voice, she's using it, you just don't like it. And then the disempowered people would come to me later and say, thank you for doing that. And that's who I am today. That's what I'm doing. I'm saying I will speak for anybody and everybody who can't speak for themselves, but more importantly, teach them how to do it for themselves. That's my main thing. And of course, that wasn't what I was doing at 6 years old in a classroom. I wasn't trying to teach them. I was just like, I am going off at the mouth because I don't like what I'm seeing here, and I'm not okay with it. And it's not going to happen on my watch. And, I'm hearing you tell similar stories of calling this guy out for being a liar without using the word liar, but nonetheless, you're calling him out for being a liar. And, always being willing to say what you feel is right and not right. And I know that that's why everybody who comes to my community in some way or another is a leader, a way shower, a teacher in their own right, a person who has that inner strength somewhere in your soul. When you came onto this planet, you already had that. And then you found this path. And I think that's why, one of your answers, you said to me, that once I heard you speak of the real Jesus, I knew you were the teacher for me. And I think that that's how it goes. People it's like something clicks and you're like, yup, this is it. And in that moment, whatever everyone's background is, whatever community you've come from, it's like that fades into the background so that your soul can like rise up. Your soul is like, hey, I'm here and I'm the real deal. I'm your higher self. And we're going to speak as the spiritual self. And then I just think it's so beautiful how you do the healing and then you go out into the world being who you are and representing whatever it is you want to represent. But people see you, they see Zaria, everybody else on today's podcast, and it's a physical, visible representation of something that's just not seen in the healing community. And I mean, I've had like goosebumps almost this entire podcast because I feel like this is so much bigger than even what I thought it was when we started as I'm listening to everybody speak. So I want to thank you for sharing that. And I wanted to ask you, yeah, is there anything else on your healing path? I know you're building your own company and you are really going off to a great start with that company. So if you would like to share that with us, like how do you envision your work in the world as a physician, as a person who is now health coaching as well, having gone through HMI, how do you envision that as growing and expanding to reach out to anybody who might think that their position in society is somehow not able to access this type of healing?
Wow. I wanted to say thank you, first of all, for the platform and for you doing what you did. Because going back a little bit, I used to fight for everybody else, but I didn't fight for me. And
Mm,
so when I met you and learning that your guru they speak truth, they work in unconditional love, and they redirect you inside. Once I got past the whole, I don't care what you look like, I don't care what you are saying per se about anything else, but what are you saying about Jesus?
hmm.
What are you teaching about unconditional love? And then teaching me how to learn how to love me. That is what got me on the healing path and me staying there. And then, of course, realizing how I had been codependent even when I thought I was strong. So, that being said, the company that I'm working and pulling together here is to collaborate with plant based, like minded individuals using the HMI principles to teach people how to clear their bodies, empower them with the knowledge of how to use the machinery that God gave them, this perfect machinery called their bodies. And once they get to that space of clearing, they can then hear Him better. I'm working on making sure that the access is not just for people who have a ton of money, because as an independent practitioner going forward, there are not a lot of structures out there to support me to get a lot of money in, but
Hmm.
I'm going to use the structures that exist to assist as many people as possible and create other structures that will also help me to be able to continue to provide a service. Working with partners, working alone, working with health coaches, as long as I'm working with people who are willing to learn these principles and free themselves. That's the goal of Lemurian Healthcare.
That's beautiful. And I'm so glad you brought up the physical body, the health of the body, because of course that's something I teach is mind, body, spirit. We can't separate and compartmentalize our being. And in marginalized communities, many of them, the health problems are even more significant than they are in other communities. Rates of diabetes and heart disease and, other health issues related to lack of education in food choices and particularly in plant-based eating, and I think that having some kind of outreach to say to people, if you start to heal your body, if you start to clean up your diet and put fresh, whole plant-based foods into your body, focus on what you're adding in, not taking out, and people start to heal things for themselves like diabetes and like heart disease, high blood pressure, they then can be in a much more clear space to do the deeper soul work. So I think that because of your background, being a physician and having the nutrition education on top of it, you're like perfectly positioned to reach people that might not even understand that healing their physical body is kind of like step one. So I'm
Yes.
so glad you brought that up. It's so beautiful.
There's one other thing that we battle as a collective community of marginalized people. We battle what you call generational trauma. And it is being recognized more and more in the Black community that we know we have this, and it goes back at least sometimes as far as 7 generations. But focusing on that and then making sure that they understand that by changing the way they feed the body will respond differently, and then they can deal with the trauma will also help them. So
That's amazing. Do you feel, I'll just ask you one more question on that issue and then move on to Sophia. Do you feel that in the Black community in general, that food and food customs and food culture is another barrier to eating healthy, that even more than the predominant culture would experience? Because we all know it's hard for everybody. We know that everybody, the programming and what is out there on detrimental health advice is affecting everybody in such a negative way. But do you feel that there are additional layers of cultural programming specifically related to food and food customs, and that if somebody in that community breaks out and starts juicing and eating plant-based, do you feel that they're facing additional backlash even for the food choices?
well, all cultures like to cling to their food choices, and the Black community is no different.
Mm-hmm.
But I've been seeing a growing amount of people who are going plant-based for the animals primarily, some of them for health. And so I see a rising trend amongst, especially the younger set who want to be healthy, and they're seeing certain things. And so I don't think especially that they don't want to let it go, but
Mm-hmm.
they definitely want the flavor in whatever food that we're
Right.
eating. We don't want bland food
Right.
whenever we do change over.
Right.
I think that's just going to be something that you're going to see. Just try to make it such that they can enjoy the food. And I see people out there trying it. We just have to teach them how to put it together so it's healthy for the body and not just for the animals.
Right. I fully agree. And I'm so grateful and happy that you're out there doing the work that you're doing. And thank you so much for contributing to this awesome podcast. And you're welcome. I'm going to move to Sophia next. Hi, Sophia.
Hi, Liana.
So now I'm introducing to everyone Sophia Cruz. And Sophia is a first-generation immigrant from Mexico who she described herself as living in the U.S. undocumented for 15 years before obtaining legal residency, and is now a U.S. citizen. But she also did not speak English until 6th grade. And she grew up in poverty, where she endured emotional, physical, and sexual abuse by her family and others. And on top of all of that, she was indoctrinated into the Pentecostal and far-right conservative views of Christianity. And she shared with me that she has since left the religious cult and has a beautiful and magnificent relationship with Jesus without the religion. And so today I am so happy and excited to have Sophia share with you her empowerment journey of how she is healing herself, and with her own platform, Empowered Mujeres, in addition to teaching the business of voiceover with her Winning in Voiceover business. So she is reaching people in a myriad of ways. So welcome, Sophia. I am so happy you're here. And if you would share with us how your journey into healing is unique to you and your marginalized community. You obviously have a number of things here that you had to face and move through, extreme challenges, like our previous guests, but different and unique. So if you can share that with our audience, that would be wonderful.
Thank you so much, Liana. It's a pleasure to be here with everyone and all these amazing women and soon-to-be men joining us. So thank you. So for me, just sorry, to talk about like how I began my healing journey.
Yeah, just how your because your background. I mean, just for the audience to know this, I've known Sophia for over 10 years now. She's been in my community healing since day one. She's definitely what I would call a day one because she was actually the very first person when I started Organic Vegan back in 2012, the very first person who signed up for a health consult when I started doing them online. Prior to that, I was doing them in person for people locally. And then I went online with Organic Vegan, and she was the very first person on my PayPal, in the same PayPal from day one. And so when you first came to the community, my community, you were heavily in the religious programming. I remember
Mhm.
very clearly you were in a very oppressive marriage. You
Yes.
were in a programmed religious world where your ex-husband had even given you your name and
Oh
was
my
not.
God, I forgot about
Oh,
that.
I remember because I was asking you if Faith was your name, and you said no, my name is Rocio. I hope I'm not butchering that too terribly. And he decided to call you Faith. So I mean, as funny as it is now, it definitely was not funny back then because you were heavily in this oppressed place.
Yeah,
And I'm thinking, wow, this is a road. This is going to be a long road
and
with
it
this
has been.
lady. Right.
And it has been, for sure.
But before we continue to say that it's been a long road, it really, okay, it's been 10 years, but the radical difference in who you are today, the love that you have for yourself today, the empowered woman of leaving freezing cold Chicago and moving to the sunshine, moving to California, growing your business, deepening your relationship with your amazing son, who is doing phenomenal in his own right because of the connection he has with you, and getting stronger and stronger in your own voice, taking care of your health, healing so many health issues. I mean, 10 years is really nothing. I mean, people spend a lifetime and don't do that much healing. So I don't want to minimize the fact that you have done a lot of heavy lifting in the past decade. And I feel super blessed that I've been a person that can witness this because you are such a shining, bright, amazing light in the world, as is everyone on this podcast, which is precisely why I invited you guys. um, so yeah, but having said that, my question to you, or what would be great if you could share with the audience, is like where you were at back then, but what was it that sort of led you to the healing? Like, because marginalized communities have these barriers, which we've been talking about for the past hour, what was it that led you to say, you know what? I'm just doing this. I'm going on this path. I deserve better. I maybe you didn't even believe you deserve better. Just kind of give us where you were at when you went into the healing path.
Yeah, so thank you for bringing that up. I actually, had forgotten a lot about that. The fact that when you grow up in oppressive, like true oppression in every facet, representing the illegal alien community, as we were termed back then, and now we're
Hate that
termed more as
terminology.
just undocumented migrant, much much better. But
Mhm,
when you face that kind of oppression of you don't belong here and how dare you are here, um, not only from a cultural standpoint of like coming from Mexico to the United States and like you guys don't belong here, but then my family also telling me that as well, right? Like I'm a woman, and
mhm,
very similar to what Saria and shared, as a female Mexican immigrant, it's a whole nother layer of oppression. And I wasn't wanted by my mom and my dad, and they wanted, males. And so my brothers always had preferred treatment over myself. Um, so this feeling of lack of belonging and the desire to belong has been with me from probably since birth.
mhm,
And my very similar to what Roxanne was saying is that there's always been an inner knowing in me that told me that someday things would be better. And I had no idea how that was going to happen. I just knew that someday life would get better because I didn't have to be told that the way I was living was horrible. Sometimes people are like, oh, it's not that
Right.
bad. No, no, no. I knew it was bad. I wanted to get out. And that really pushed me to continue along the journey of oppression because I submitted to the religious authority saying that, when you get married, your husband is over you. It's Lord over you, and that you are to
God.
submit to them. And so I continued the journey of oppression into that marriage, but never, but fighting it along the way, right? In fact, I remember him telling me, "You never follow me. You always are trying to lead." And I'm like, yes, I'm never going to be the person following you. It's just not who I am. And he hated that about me. He hated that I always did it my way or that I would do something completely off. And so this journey of me coming to find you at Organic Vegan really became just because I had no choice. I was in a major health crisis. I had hypothyroidism. I was suffering from post-traumatic stress syndrome from the sexual abuse that I endured as a young teenager. Um, and I was a single parent to my son for 8 years. And I didn't date during that time. And so I was devoted to Jesus and the church. Now, my devotion to Jesus has been, and as you have confirmed, has been real, but it was marred by religion because I was taught a lot of things about Jesus that isn't true. And so, but my connection to Jesus has been real from the first time I heard about Jesus, and I've always cried out to Jesus to help me get out. Um, and so, as I was devoted to Jesus and the church and my son, I knew I wasn't going to allow a man to come into our lives to hurt my son. My son was, from day one, my um, most important purpose because I had already experienced a severe trauma and abuse from my previous pregnancy. And my first pregnancy was born out of rape. And I was forced to place him for adoption at at 18 months. And so I was rejected by my family and rejected by society at that time because I was only 15 and teen pregnancies were not very common as much back then. And so when the hospital thought I was placing my son up for adoption initially, like right after birth, they treated me like I didn't deserve to be a mom. So I had a lot of pain with that pregnancy. And my culture teaches us that you do not give away your children. There's some good to that in the sense that abortion isn't like the first thing you do when you find out you're pregnant with unwanted children. We are taught that we keep our children, and no matter what, you sacrifice yourself for your children. And my mom told me, he's not a dog, you're not giving him away. And so I chose to keep my son from that pressure from my family that I wasn't going to do that. So I kept him.
At 15, you were 15.
Yeah. At 16, by the time he was born, I was a junior in high school. And so that trauma of that pain with my first son caused me to then, when I had a quote unquote second chance with my son that I raised, where I knew there was no way that I was going to let anyone hurt him. And there was no way I was going to allow the abuse to continue with him because there was a lot of abuse with my first son. And because I had nowhere to live and I had to endure more sexual abuse to live and provide diapers for him. And so I didn't have the capacity to be present with my son, my first son. And I knew that. And it broke my heart when my second son was born because I knew holding my first son the way I held my second son. And so there was a lot of like redemption aspects to being a mom again, and like
Mhm.
no one's going to take him away from me, and no matter what happens, I'm going to do everything in my power to love my son and care for him. And because of that dedication, I started seeking a different path from what I've known, which is
Mhm.
obviously extreme abuse, a lot of obviously cycle of poverty, the immigrant life my family endured. It's everybody endured abuse. It wasn't just me. And
Right.
unfortunately, in those situations where there's so much pressure and so much stress, my dad going out to work, my mom staying home, my dad becoming an alcoholic, my grandparents doing the same. They come home and they take out their abuse from the world to their family, right?
Right.
That's what happens. And so we are, taught that you endure it and you should be lucky. You should be lucky that we're doing
Gosh.
this for you, because back in the day, we would get beat up with soaked rope. You're only getting beat up with a belt. So that's better.
Oh
Um,
my gosh.
and so that was like, you don't deserve anything because we're doing everything we can to provide, beans and rice for you. And that's all you deserve. And I was taught that I wasn't worth providing for. And so I knew that I didn't want to do that to my son. And when I couldn't even provide for my firstborn son, it almost felt like that dagger of repeating what my family did to me.
The
And
cycle.
yeah,
Right.
where it's like, I can't even provide diapers and a formula for him. Um, and when the abuse got to a point where I knew that keeping my son in an abusive home with drugs and drug addicts, I knew I couldn't keep doing that. And so I called the number that I got from high school and I talked to a counselor and she said, we can meet. And so we began an open adoption process. And that counselor ended up becoming a mentor for me, unbeknownst to me, how valuable that would be for me. And she happens to be
Yeah.
white American. And she
Oh,
saw my plight and she gave me hope when I had none. And she started telling me that I could go to college. And I'm like, what do you mean I can go to college? Like, there's a reason why these kids who are trying to get documentation are called dreamers, because they're actually daring to dream a different life. And
mhm.
in my generation, before the dreamers were a thing, it was like, you don't even get to dream. Like, getting to dream wasn't even a reality for me.
That
I,
wasn't even a privilege that you had. It
yeah,
was almost like even dreaming was a privilege.
right. Dreaming was a privilege that was not going to be part of my life, not as a first generation immigrant, not as someone who didn't even speak English, not someone who didn't even have a green card at age 15, right?
Wow.
I wasn't even legal here when all of this was happening. So, my counselor told me, like, without you having residency, you don't have access to a lot of benefits that you would have had if you were legal. So then we started the process of becoming legal at that time. So it's been that history I felt was important to share, why when my second son came along, why that determination and the fierceness to protect him at all costs was so strong for me. And I sought out books and I went to workshops, granted, a lot of them within the church. But I had a lot of good, even though my first experience as a mother was so horrific and it
Yes.
really robbed me so much of my natural maternal instincts, I was able to tap into those with my son, my second son, and, never let him cry, never put him in a crib, never did any of that bullshit that they teach parents to do.
It's amazing, honestly, that you were able to do that, Sophia,
Yeah.
truly.
And I stayed home with him and he, I didn't know anything about attachment parenting, but he was on me 24/7. I was naked. I breastfed him. I just followed everything my heart guided me to do for him. And, and because he was so valuable in just that preciousness of who he is and the hope that he provided for me, and really my desire to become a better person, not just a better mother, but a better person for him so that he wouldn't grow up in these cycles that I grew up in. That's what propelled me to get to the level where I was to find you. Because if it had been at age 15, when my original mentor came, she had to work with a very closed off version of myself, because I had no even ability to think outside of the church and my family. Like, it was just scandalous. And I had a best friend, her name is Chrissy, and my family hated her because she would tell me, when you turn 18, you don't have to live like this anymore. And they would tell me that she was filling me up with bullshit, and that this is American ideology that does not apply to me.
Wow.
And so I was never allowed to go anywhere. I was very, very sheltered. All I was allowed to do was work. And so I finally got married. Finally, as if that was like such a great thing. I did, obviously, mother wound, father wound personified, abandonment, shame and guilt. Let's call it for what it is. I then felt like, well, my son wanted a dad, and I felt horrible for not providing that for him. And so I opened myself up to dating, and I had really a wonderful community. I mean, even in the church, I was very blessed to have people who really loved me to the best of their ability, and want to support me and help me branch out and become more successful than I was at that time. And of course, I think this is true for a lot of people, where women feel like they need a man to be successful.
Right,
Like,
right.
you can't be successful on your own. So it was encouraged to find someone and allow someone to come into my life, because I really was closed off. And so I, of course, found the most oppressive person, because that's what my energy was, and attracted that. And so because I hadn't had any sexual activity, I wasn't sexual. I mean, as a Christian, you're not supposed to have sex outside of marriage. It's already taboo enough that I'm a single parent and divorced. God forbid I also be sleeping around. So I'm like, of course, I'm not sleeping around. So I hadn't obviously slept around. So I was celibate during that single time. And so when I got married and we had sex for the first time, that brought on a massive amount of post-traumatic stress from the rape.
Oh my gosh.
Because I hadn't processed that. I had not processed that. I mean, I had gone to counseling, but my son was a priority. I went from massive rape to dating my son's dad and getting married. And because of that marriage, stopping the repeated sexual abuse and violence I was enduring by a family member, is the reason why I married him, because he stood up for me, and no one had ever done that. And
so let me ask you a brief question. So between the time that you were raped at 15 and then had your first son and tried to keep him, and then eventually gave him up for adoption because there was no way that you were able to take care of him, and then you had your second son and stayed single for a period of time, just you and your son, and taking care of your son. During that time, you were being raped as well, and then your husband stepped in. Is that, just so I'm understanding?
So when I was being raped from 15, it was from 15 to 20, 5 years.
Oh my
From
gosh.
the first rape, which was a person in my building who wanted to date me, and I said no. And he took it out on me by raping me after school. I lost my first boyfriend because he thought I cheated on him, which was not true, but I didn't know how to tell him. So I had that initial rape. That's where my first son was born from, that rape. Then when I ended up being homeless, because my mom is someone who suffers from bipolar manic depression, she wasn't able to pay the rent. So we were evicted. And I was homeless with a 2-month-old and my brother, who was 2 years old at the time, and my grandparents, as awful as they've always been, came to pick up my brother and left me on the streets with $10 and a gallon of milk and said, "God bless you." And I ended up homeless with my son and sleeping on couches and trying to go to school. And then a distant cousin of mine said, "You can live with us." They were brothers. And one of them was massively, what's that called when someone is like obsessed with you? He was obsessed with me, and I knew that because I remember him at my grandparents' house, and I didn't like the way he looked at me. Well, I went to live there because I had no choice after a while, and he became a rapist and violently and physically abused me when my son was there too. And
Oh
they
my
also they
gosh.
also sold drugs. So I was in a lot of danger with my son, and he fed him cocaine one day, and he ended up in the hospital. And the guy who would come and get high or whatever, he told me that my cousin gave him cocaine and that I needed to know that. And I told him thank you because I was at work. And that's when I decided I had to place him for adoption, because he told me that if I didn't, he was going to kill him because he hated him, because he thought that he was my first boyfriend's son. He didn't know that it was from a rape, because I had told everybody it was from my first boyfriend because I didn't want to tell people that it was from rape. So he hated that I loved my ex-boyfriend and that I would scream his name in the middle of the night, and he took it out on my son. And that is how I ended up in that abusive relationship with him. Then, when I placed my son for adoption, because he basically forced me, he ended up violently, physically abusing me to the point where I couldn't even see out of my eyes. Because a friend of mine comforted me that night, and
Hmm.
it happened to be a man, and he thought I was quote unquote cheating on him. And what ended up happening is that he got so used to violently treating me that way. And of course, I was allowing it because I didn't feel like I had a choice. Um, I was in this cycle of abuse with him. And I went to live with my mom after I placed my son up for adoption, because nothing was keeping me there anymore. I wasn't looking for food anymore. I didn't care. I wanted to die, basically. I wanted to die because I was so heartbroken that I had lost my son. And I then said, okay, well, go ahead and kill me. I don't care. I'm leaving. And I left. I went to my mom's house, but he would come over with a gun and threaten me to, if I didn't come downstairs, he was going to kill my brother. And so that fear kept me engaged in him coming over anytime he wanted, sexually abusing me by gunpoint, and then making me think I was quote unquote free when I really wasn't. So when I dated my
Wow.
second son's dad, my second son's dad, he raped me when he realized I was dating someone, and he left hickeys all over me and then dropped me off his house and said, here, take the leftovers. And my ex-husband looked at me and like, what the heck? And I told him, I'm like, he rapes me and I don't want to, but he does it. And he stood up to him and he said, if you ever touch her again, I will kill you. And it actually stopped. And so I ended up marrying him, and that's how I ended up
Wow.
having my second son. But so I didn't have time to process 5 years of rape. And my son's a dad, he did what he could, but he also, a lot of trauma, a lot of abuse. Um, I just felt like I couldn't trust him. How could I? How can I trust another man? And so I acted like probably like how dogs, when they're abused, they cower and they go in their crates and they don't want to come out.
Yes. Yes.
That's basically what I was. And my ex-husband and then when my son was born, he hated that I was so protected over him. I'm like, you can't touch him. You got to wash your hands. You can't do this. You can't. And he saw me as like this nagging, bitchy wife. And he's like, he's my son too. And I'm like, I know, but we have to be very careful with him. And he hated that. And he ended up deciding that he couldn't be a father to a son with a mom like me. And we ended up getting divorced really quickly. I mean, the marriage lasted about less than 2 years. So
Wow.
I
That's
became a single parent. And so then it was just about caring for my son. And then when I
mhm.
got married to my second husband, and again, no sexual activity, it's when it all came back. Like
The trauma
I was
came back.
just like, because
So
I finally could rest. I was finally at a place where I'm not running for my life. I'm not trying to make ends meet. I'm not this oppressed, like this poor single mom. It was like my body finally was like, okay, this is it. And it caused, it was the start of my health declining
mhm.
massively. And then also realizing I married the wrong person.
Wow. So for the audience listening, for everybody today, the magnitude, first of all, of everybody on today's podcast, just what people go through, you just don't know until they have an opportunity to share their story. And obviously, my intention for today's podcast for everybody is for humanity, for souls to come together and support each other and understand that the path that every person walks is, it's just, you just have no idea until you hear someone's life. And for you, having this totality of being considered, quote, an illegal, which is, I mean, to call a person illegal in and of itself is insane to me. And to be Mexican, to be viewed in America as a person with brown skin, to have gone through adoption, giving up your son for adoption, and being a woman, and in your own culture, some of what you were saying about being a female in the Mexican culture reminded me of what Zaria was saying at the start of the podcast about being a woman in her community and the differences, that the oppression of the community in general, but then there's oppression from within your own community, which she shared that she also experienced. And so you're facing that as well. And you have this severe trauma from multiple serial rape and motherhood at 15, and and then the absence of your son and then your other son, and finding healing. I mean, all of that, all of what you lived through and experienced, and finding the path of healing. I mean, to me, I've known you for 10 years, as I shared when I introduced you, but honestly, I'm sitting here in tears because as I'm hearing you tell the story from a different perspective, and for the purpose of this podcast, I'm sitting here just saying, I can't even begin to understand how, not so much what, but how you even had the courage to embark on healing. And I know one of the answers you said in my questions, you said my son was a big factor in encouraging me to find different pathways than what I had lived. So I guess that's what you're saying, right? Is that being a mother the second time around with your son was, you were saying, I'm not going to allow this to continue. And some connection, your connection to Jesus and that fire within you that had been put out so many years ago, it's like it was starting to rise and starting to say, wait a minute, I'm not allowing generational abuse. And Roxanne talked about generational trauma, and Zaria talked about it. And it's like the people who step out from their marginalized community and say, I'm not doing this anymore. And here you are. I mean, running an incredibly successful business with a great income, and you're outspoken, and you've healed your physical body. I mean, do you have any, gosh, I know you're with your website, your own business, you have your own voice in reaching out to people that might not otherwise hear about healing, but do you have anything for the podcast listeners who are listening to you and who have just heard you share your harrowing journey through life that I think so many people can't even comprehend? That do you have any words of wisdom or something that anybody listening to this who might relate to some or all of your story can say, okay, I deserve healing. I'm worthy of this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to look for a better path out of this oppression and abuse. Do you have anything that you can share?
Yeah. Yeah. After listening to Illuminations and really pondering through this, and like you said, being here today and not even remembering some of this that you had to remind me of, you always talk about this, and every single thing is that it is my divine birthright to have happiness, abundance, joy, peace, and bliss. That is my inherent birthright. And it took me so long to really understand exactly what that means. And I think the hope that was inside of me at a very young age, that I was not going to stay oppressed, silenced, abused for my life. And then seeing my second son and knowing there's no way I will be run over before I allow anyone to touch him in that way. And it was just that fierceness, like you said, like, just no. And I did a TEDx talk outline, and my title was like, I refused to believe that this was going to be my life forever. I refused it at a
Mhm.
very young age. And then when I was told, I was a single parent with my son, and that because he's Mexican too, and because we were in low income family housing, that he was going to end up in jail and doing drugs and in all this shit. I'm like, fuck that. Fuck you, Dr. Dobson. My son is not going to be a fucking statistic.
I
Like,
love that.
no way. And I said that to him in the radio on my drive to work when I heard him say this shit. Focus on the family Christian bullshit. And I was like, no, that is not going to be my son. And I'm like, if it is true that Jesus is for me and that God loves me and that the universe supports me, then I will do whatever it takes, but this will not happen. And I am so grateful to say that it didn't happen. My son is an incredibly successful entrepreneur himself. He's thriving as a 26-year-old, financially massively independent. We just had a financial meeting with him, and his advisor is like, very few people can say they're net positive. Uh, and, you know, thriving, never has been in jail.
And he just not only has he not been in jail, he just published a book and was on a nationally syndicated talk show talking about his book and did a book tour and is a self-made news reporter. Like,
Yes,
I
literally.
mean, I
He's a
think he's
trailblazer. Yeah, he's a trailblazer in his own right. And I had to tell him that.
yes.
He's like, oh, mom, I didn't even realize that's what I am. I'm like, yes, no, you're a trailblazer. Like, you've given other journalists an opportunity to create a path for themselves, because before him doing that, there weren't other people doing that. How does this random kid at that time, 24 years old, end up on national news talking about the things that he's seen? Like,
Yes.
it was unheard of.
Amazing.
Yeah,
Amazing.
but I've always supported him. I mean, yes, mother wound and father wound, but to what I could do and the ability that I had, thank you, Jesus, supporting him always. Like, I'm always going to be here for you, and whatever you want to pursue. Of course, it isn't what I would want him to pursue, but that's not my business. He's an adult now; he gets to choose what he wants. So, I would say that one of the things that came really super clear is understanding that because we are born, just by the mere fact that we exist as a human on this planet, we have the birthright to find that joy and
Yes.
find ourselves on this healing path. And
Yes.
Jesus will make a way where there is no way. I am
Absolutely. 100%.
100%. This is me. When we started 12DB school, I was bawling my eyes out because I understood that when you talked about the women in Africa who have to travel 30 miles to get water,
Mhm.
I resonate with that because that woman may not hear you, but I somehow learned English, and not only learned it, I speak it well, and I'm educated. And even though I didn't go to college, I understand what you're saying. And by God's grace, I can hear you and
Mhm.
apply the teachings and heal my mother wound and father wound and heal my relationship with my son, and help him, even support him now as an adult with what I know, and really change our lives a 180 even from that. And so I want to tell people that just because you are human, if you are hearing me, you're human, you deserve to thrive, you deserve success, you deserve happiness. And it doesn't matter what your legal status is, it doesn't matter what country you were born in, it doesn't matter what family you were born into. It doesn't matter what fucking religion says about you. What matters is that you are human. And because you are human, you have this right. You have the right to hope, to dream, to thrive, and not just succeed. And it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what anybody says about your race
Absolutely.
or ethnicity or the oppression within your family.
No.
None of that matters.
And I've of course been teaching this since day one, and I've been preaching it since I was a child. And I feel like my work is never done. It's never going to be enough until every last human in existence at least hears that. Whether or not they listen or they follow or they want to do the work, that's their choice. But until every single soul has an opportunity to understand that they're worthy of that and that they're loved, my work isn't done. It'll never be, I'll never be finished. It's why I felt pressure at age 2. Like, I need to get on this. I didn't know what I needed to do at that point, but I knew I had to get on this because it was so urgent to me, and it's no less urgent today. It's even more so. And that's why this podcast is so important to me, because I feel like the voices, the different languages, the different communities, the marginalized communities, the more people that can take that on, like you just said, all of those things that you just said about, regardless of background or religion or race, you believe finally that you're worthy. And I remember way back when you said to me, Liana, like, you believed in me and loved me when I didn't believe in myself and love myself. And my vision, my goal is to do that for every single soul out there. And I know that that's not realistic. There's 8 billion people on the planet, but I am sure as hell going to try and work harder and do everything I can to make that happen. And I feel so strongly that this podcast is the beginning of something so massive, of voices being out there and reaching other people and spreading far and wide. And the message that you're worthy, that all the other stuff that identifies you, or that you think identifies you, or that society has said identifies you, if you just put that to the side momentarily to look within at your soul and see the being that is created in the divine light, that is worthy of love, that is worthy of joy and happiness and abundance and peace and respect, that's what we're doing here. Like everything you just said, that is why we're here. That is why we're on this podcast. And I will not stop until 8 million people hear this. So like, I'm going to be here for a very long time. But, thank you so much for being here, Sophia, and showing people. I think it's what I said to Zaria and Roxanne. It's like people seeing you and saying, okay, she did it. I think I can do it. I don't think there's anything more powerful than that, because as I keep reiterating, all of you who are my direct students, are people who had that fire within you. You had that connection. You came to the work and started doing it. But there are other people who, I don't fit their mold. I don't come from their community. I'm somebody with a lot of privilege, and a lot of education, and I look a certain way, and I have a certain background and a supportive family and wealth and all these things that people could use. You didn't, nor did anyone else on this podcast, but people could use that as a barrier to say, well, this person delivering these teachings doesn't really get it. Of course, what they think I don't get is not at all related to the healing. The healing is for your soul, and I'm speaking to souls. But I completely understand, and it's because I understand how people can form those beliefs about a barrier to healing. And when they see someone from their own community, or that they identify with in some way, maybe it's women who have been raped, maybe it's women who are single mothers, maybe it's women who are Mexican, who have been called illegal, who were hated within their own community for not being a boy, or, in Zaria's community for being a Black woman, or, Roxanne's unique situation. When people see that, it's so much more powerful, because they're like, okay, she did it, or he did it. I at least believe it's possible. And that for me is the biggest point of today's topic, is for people to see, no matter where you come from, you deserve it. You deserve healing. And
we deserve to make the choices that are best for ourselves. And for me, that meant cutting out my entire family, because all of them have been toxic from day one. And in my culture, that is like, you are the biggest traitor for doing such things. And
yes.
And being great, like it's freeing, it's amazing. And I'm not saying that everybody has to do that. I'm just saying that for me, that's what I had to. I mean, clearly, you heard my story. Like, I did not have a family that allowed all that.
No.
Incredibly abuse. I'm going to keep them around if I'm actually healing. That would be mind blowing to say, oh yeah, my family's so awesome, let me keep them. But to really do that work and then understand that, like, I am the happiest I've ever been. I am most financial success I've ever been. Like, I'm single. I don't need a man. I finally believe that.
took a minute.
It took me a minute. And I'm connected to the real Jesus. I don't have to be oppressed anymore, and I don't have to live a life of oppression. And it's like it's mind blowing that almost at the age of 50, that is my reality. Like it took me 47 years to get here, right? I'm going to be 47.
Right.
Just that in 47 years, I'm finally at a place where my life is about me and my dreams, my success, my everything, because my son is already grown, and I'm here to support him, but he's a very independent. So it's about me. And it's like, that was even so hard it was hard for me to have a life about me without feeling selfish, because we're in our culture, it's like you're selfish if you even put yourself remotely first. And to
Yes.
not have that in any oppression and not feel selfish is like, oh, it's hard. It's hard to adjust to that. But
Yeah.
I've done it, and I'm super happy that I did, and it's amazing. So,
And I feel like women in general, definitely in your community, but it echoes what Zaria was saying as well, that women are expected to just, be the front line, support the men at all costs, regardless of what's happening to them. And, that it would be, she didn't use the word selfish, but basically that same energy of like, how dare you speak up for your actual pain and your actual oppression, because we need you to be the face of this cause or this system of oppression.
yeah, and when the Bible tells me that I needed to be meek and quiet, and I wasn't, I thought something was wrong with me. I always would pray. I'm like, God, why can't I be meek? Why can't I be quiet? I would pray. I would pray for that, because I'm like, I don't understand why I'm always getting in trouble for speaking out and like sharing my mind. And
yes,
and I didn't realize that that's the reason why I could get out, because I wasn't meek and quiet, and I wasn't submissive, and I wasn't a doormat. And I've always been feisty, and I know that came from just feeling unable to do anything in such despair. I think that's the result of that. When you're small and you see all this abuse and you can't do anything about it, you feel powerless. So
yes.
I think that powerlessness created that fieriness in me. And then as I heal, I understand how to be fiery, but without having to be rebellious or doing all the other things that I was doing because of my wounds. So thank you.
Right. You're
Can I
welcome.
just say thank you? Thank you. I will never get tired of saying thank you to you. I hear you saying you got to work harder, but like you've worked so hard, and how I ended up being your first customer. I think that's such a miracle. It's such a miracle that I found you so fast. And, I cried myself to sleep every night as a child, begging Jesus to help me. And the minute that you showed up in a way that I could find you, he delivered me to you. When you think about it like that, it's almost like the Moses story, right? Like, and you were the Pharaoh that found me, in that analogy. It's like I was delivered to your hands the minute you showed up, because I had been praying for that path since I was a little girl. And I want to thank you for that.
You're so welcome, Sophia. And I have an immense gratitude for you as well, and everybody here today. Because you were that first person, something I believe so strongly is that, there's no teacher without students. There's no purpose for my being. Of course, I'm a mom. I'm talking about my life path of teaching. There's no purpose in that if there aren't the students. And to me, you are these amazing souls who have been brave and courageous and gone against the programming and the family cults and the religious cults and the cultural cults, and stepped up to do what is not easy and to be way showers. And that's why I work so hard. That's why I feel like my work will never be done, and why I don't even like sleeping, because I'm like, there's more to be done. There's more people. I can't leave people out there left alone, like without here, like whatever I'm capable of doing, which is not everything. And it's not even, when you look at 8 billion people, it's just not a lot in the big picture, but it's whatever God allows me to do, whatever Jesus allows me to do, I do it, and I continue to do it and do more of it and speak louder and reach more people. And it's only because of you and everybody else who are the students. Otherwise, everything I'm doing is is pointless. And it's why I've also said many times that if there's one person listening, I'm still working as hard. If there's a million people listening, I'm doing the same thing. And having these conversations with all of you today is just, the level of gratitude I have is overwhelming, because it is a testament to the fact that the word and the truth of Jesus is reaching people. It's mattering. It's having an impact. It's actual lives are changing in radical ways that you can't even. I could not, when I started organic vegan and you signed up for that first health consult, I didn't fathom at all the magnitude of where we would be today, where you would be, where I would be, where this would be, and how this community would grow, and all the new people that would come. And you were that trailblazer. You were the very first one. And, you've been an amazing light for everybody. And I'm just grateful for you as well. So thank you so much. And I want to thank everyone who was here on today's podcast and everyone listening to episode 5 of Deep Throat. And by that, I mean throat chakra. You can follow me at Liana Shanti on Instagram and Twitter. I'm also on YouTube now, Liana Shanti. My website is lianashanti.com, where you'll find all my programs, my free offerings, and my blog. And you can also go to illuminationsforecast.com if you'd like to subscribe to my weekly forecast message, which is everything from prayers and meditations, energy clearings, information on what's happening on the planet, the planets in the sky, a dash of quantum physics, lots of humor, lots of stories, and a frequent backyard rooster. So until next time, beautiful people, aloha.